Get this grease-stained trash off my floating garage, now! The voice did not ask. It struck. It sliced through the rhythmic, hypnotic lapping of the Pacific Ocean against the concrete pylons like a serrated knife hitting bone. It was a voice that had never known the word no. A voice cultivated in boardrooms and country clubs, dripping with an entitlement so potent it felt almost physical. I did not flinch. I did not drop the wrench I was holding, nor did I scramble out from beneath the chassis of the 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB that I was currently restoring.
I simply tightened my grip on the tool, finished the quarter turn on the suspension bolt I had been adjusting, and took a slow, deliberate breath of the salty air. I lay there for a moment on the cold, tempered glass floor of the floating platform, looking down through the transparent surface at the deep, churning blue water 20 feet below. A school of barracuda darted through the shadows of the artificial reef, silent and efficient. I envied them. They didn't have to deal with homeowners associations. Slowly, I slid out from under the car, wiping a smudge of marine-grade lithium grease from my cheek with the back of my forearm. I sat up, blinking against the harsh brilliance of the morning sun reflecting off the water, and looked at the intruder. Standing 10 feet away, framed by the infinite horizon, was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice and expensive skincare products. Serafina Golt. She was a study in monochromatic power, dressed in a tailored light blue suit that matched the shallow waters of the bay perfectly. A calculated choice, no doubt. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a helmet of perfection that the ocean breeze failed to disturb. Oversized sunglasses hid her eyes, but the sneer painted on her lips told me everything I needed to know. She held a glass of white wine in one hand and a sleek digital tablet in the other, looking down at me with the expression one might reserve for a cockroach found in a salad. Behind her, 2 private security contractors in tactical vests shifted their weight uneasily, their hands hovering near their belts. They looked hot, uncomfortable, and decidedly out of place on my ocean. "I am speaking to you, mechanic," she snapped, taking a sip of her wine. "I ordered this facility cleared for inspection by noon. Who let you in? Was it the locksmith? I will have his license revoked by sunset." I stood up, unfolding my 6'2" frame slowly. I wore a faded gray t-shirt stained with oil and cargo pants that had seen active duty in 3 different deserts. I checked the dive watch on my wrist. It was 9 a.m. "Inspection?" I asked, my voice raspy from disuse. I had spent the last week in silence, calibrating the systems of this underwater fortress, enjoying the solitude. "I don't recall scheduling an inspection." Serafina laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You don't schedule anything. You are labor, and you are trespassing on HOA property. This floating platform, that car, and this entire glass monstrosity are under the jurisdiction of the Azure Coast Homeowners Association. I am Serafina Golt, the president, and you have exactly 60 seconds to remove this vehicle before I have my security team cut the cables and send it to the bottom of the reef as an artificial habitat." She gestured behind her. One of the guards stepped forward, pulling a heavy pair of industrial bolt cutters from a loop on his belt. He moved toward the thick steel cables anchoring the floating garage platform to the main house structure. "You want to sink the car?" I asked, leaning casually against the fender of the Ferrari. "That seems wasteful." "It is a violation of aesthetic codes," Serafina declared, tapping her tablet aggressively. Rule 402. No unauthorized vehicles on external maritime platforms. Penalty: immediate removal and a fine of $50,000. You are dirtying my ocean view. She did not know who I was. To her, I was just Brecken Vance, a squatter, a mechanic, a nobody. She did not know about the 15 years I spent in the teams, the operations that never made the news, or the substantial payout from a private contracting gig that allowed me to purchase this seized asset from the United States Marshals Service in a blind auction 3 days ago. She thought she was looking at a vagrant. She was looking at a commander who had specialized in asymmetric warfare. "This isn't HOA property," I said calmly, reaching into my back pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of heavy cream-colored paper. It was the deed, stamped with the federal seal of the Department of Justice. "This is a federal asset, formerly seized from a cartel financier, now privately owned by me. Your rules stop at the shoreline, Mrs. Galt." She didn't even look at the paper. She signaled the guard with the bolt cutters. "Cut it loose." The guard stepped forward, his boots heavy on the metal walkway connecting the garage to the house. He raised the cutters toward the thick steel cables. If he cut them, the platform would drift, unbalanced, and the cars would slide into the depths. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I simply reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on a remote control fob. With a mechanical hiss of hydraulics, the steel walkway beneath the guard's feet suddenly retracted. It happened so fast, they barely had time to yelp. The metal bridge slid back into the main house structure, leaving a 10-foot gap of open ocean between the main house and the floating garage where I stood. The guards stumbled, barely catching their balance on the edge of the main deck, looking down at the swirling water below. Serafina gasped, spilling wine onto her pristine suit. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, clutching the railing of the main house, now separated from me by a moat of seawater. "Safety mechanism," I said, my voice carrying easily over the water. "Prevents unauthorized access to the garage. You were saying something about cutting me loose?" Serafina stared at me across the gap, her face turning a shade of violet that clashed with her suit. She realized then that she could not reach me, and her guards could not reach the car. I was an island within an island. Before we expose her corruption, quick question. Where are you watching this story unfold from? Drop your country below. "You think you are clever," she hissed, regaining her composure but losing none of her venom. "You think a little technology makes you safe? You have no idea how things work in Azure Coast. We control the water. We control the..." I simply tightened my grip on the tool, finished the quarter turn on the suspension bolt I had been adjusting, and took a slow, deliberate breath of the salty air. I lay there for a moment on the cold, tempered glass floor of the floating platform, looking down through the transparent surface at the deep, churning blue water 20 feet below. A school of barracuda darted through the shadows of the artificial reef, silent and efficient. I envied them. They didn't have to deal with homeowners associations. Slowly, I slid out from under the car, wiping a smudge of marine-grade lithium grease from my cheek with the back of my forearm. I sat up, blinking against the harsh brilliance of the morning sun reflecting off the water, and looked at the intruder. Standing 10 feet away, framed by the infinite horizon, was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice and expensive skincare products. Serafina Galt. She was a study in monochromatic power, dressed in a tailored light blue suit that matched the shallow waters of the bay perfectly. A calculated choice, no doubt. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a helmet of perfection that the ocean breeze failed to disturb. Oversized sunglasses hid her eyes, but the sneer painted on her lips told me everything I needed to know. She held a glass of white wine in one hand and a sleek digital tablet in the other, looking down at me with the expression one might reserve for a cockroach found in a salad. Behind her, two private security contractors in tactical vests shifted their weight uneasily, their hands hovering near their belts. They looked hot, uncomfortable, and decidedly out of place on my ocean. "I am speaking to you, mechanic," she snapped, taking a sip of her wine. "I ordered this facility cleared for inspection by noon. Who let you in? Was it the locksmith? I will have his license revoked by sunset." I stood up, unfolding my 6'2" frame slowly. I wore a faded gray t-shirt stained with oil and cargo pants that had seen active duty in 3 different deserts. I checked the dive watch on my wrist. It was 9 a.m. "Inspection?" I asked, my voice raspy from disuse. I had spent the last week in silence, calibrating the systems of this underwater fortress, enjoying the solitude. "I don't recall scheduling an inspection." Serafina laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You don't schedule anything. You are labor, and you are trespassing on HOA property. This floating platform, that car, and this entire glass monstrosity are under the jurisdiction of the Azure Coast Homeowners Association. I am Serafina Galt, the president, and you have exactly 60 seconds to remove this vehicle before I have my security team cut the cables and send it to the bottom of the reef as an artificial habitat." She gestured behind her. One of the guards stepped forward, pulling a heavy pair of industrial bolt cutters from a loop on his belt. He moved toward the thick steel cables anchoring the floating garage platform to the main house structure. "You want to sink the car?" I asked, leaning casually against the fender of the Ferrari. "That seems wasteful." "It is a violation of aesthetic codes," Serafina declared, tapping her tablet aggressively. "Rule 402, no unauthorized vehicles on external maritime platforms. Penalty, immediate removal, and a fine of $50,000. You are dirtying my ocean view." She did not know who I was. To her, I was just Brecken Vance, a squatter, a mechanic, a nobody. She did not know about the 15 years I spent in the teams, the operations that never made the news, or the substantial payout from a private contracting gig that allowed me to purchase this seized asset from the United States Marshals Service in a blind auction 3 days ago. She thought she was looking at a vagrant. She was looking at a commander who had specialized in asymmetric warfare. "This isn't HOA property," I said calmly, reaching into my back pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of heavy cream-colored paper. It was the deed, stamped with the federal seal of the Department of Justice. "This is a federal asset, formerly seized from a cartel financier, now privately owned by me. Your rules stop at the shoreline, Mrs. Galt." She didn't even look at the paper. She signaled the guard with the bolt cutters. "Cut it loose." The guard stepped forward, his boots heavy on the metal walkway connecting the garage to the house. He raised the cutters toward the thick steel cables. If he cut them, the platform would drift, unbalanced, and the cars would slide into the depths. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I simply reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on a remote control fob. With a mechanical hiss of hydraulics, the steel walkway beneath the guard's feet suddenly retracted. It happened so fast, they barely had time to yelp. The metal bridge slid back into the main house structure, leaving a 10-foot gap of open ocean between the main house and the floating garage where I stood. The guards stumbled, barely catching their balance on the edge of the main deck, looking down at the swirling water below. Serafina gasped, spilling wine onto her pristine suit. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, clutching the railing of the main house, now separated from me by a moat of seawater. "Safety mechanism," I said, my voice carrying easily over the water. "Prevents unauthorized access to the garage. You were saying something about cutting me loose?" Serafina stared at me across the gap, her face turning a shade of violet that clashed with her suit. She realized then that she could not reach me, and her guards could not reach the car. I was an island within an island. Before we expose her corruption, quick question. Where are you watching this story unfold from? Drop your country below. "You think you are clever," she hissed, regaining her composure but losing none of her venom. "You think a little technology makes you safe? You have no idea how things work in Azure Coast. We control the water. We control the power. We control the access." She pointed a manicured finger at me like a weapon. "You have 1 hour to vacate, or I will make your life a living hell. I will cut your utilities. I will block your bridge. I will starve you out of that glass box until you are begging to leave." "I paid cash," I replied, turning back to the Ferrari. "I'm not going anywhere." "We'll see about that," she spat. "Boys, let's go. We have a blockade to organize." She turned on her heel, the click of her shoes fading as she marched back through the main house toward the land bridge. I watched her go, feeling the familiar hum of adrenaline in my veins. It wasn't fear. It was focused. She had just declared war. She thought she was besieging a mechanic. She didn't realize she was besieging a fortress commanded by a man who could survive a month on a handful of rice and sheer will. I waited until her SUV disappeared up the winding cliff road before I moved. The Glass Atoll, as the previous owner had named it, was an architectural marvel and a logistical nightmare. It sat 300 yards off the coast, a series of interlocking glass and concrete spheres hovering above the reef. The only connection to the mainland was a narrow, reinforced causeway. Serafina hadn't been bluffing about the utilities. The power lines and fresh water pipes ran underneath that causeway. 10 minutes later, the lights in the mansion flickered and died. The hum of the air conditioning unit, essential in this tropical heat, silenced. Then came the sound of heavy machinery. I picked up a pair of high-powered naval binoculars and looked toward the shore. A yellow excavator, emblazoned with the HOA logo, was tearing up the asphalt of the causeway. They weren't just blocking the road, they were physically severing the connection. A massive trench was being dug, severing the water main and the power conduit. Water sprayed into the air like a geyser before being shut off at the street valve. The power lines sparked and went dead. I was now physically cut off from the world, floating in a glass bubble with no electricity and no fresh water source. Or so she thought. I walked to the central control room of the house, a submerged chamber with walls of 3-inch thick acrylic. Schools of tropical fish swam past the windows, oblivious to the conflict above. The temperature was already rising, the air growing stale. I walked to a heavy titanium panel on the wall and placed my palm against the biometric scanner. It flashed green. "Welcome, Commander," a synthesized voice chimed. "Initialize Blue Core Protocol," I commanded. Deep beneath the structure, Anchored to the bedrock of the ocean floor, the house possessed a secret that was not on any county blueprint. The previous owner, a paranoid cartel leader, hadn't trusted the local grid either. He had installed a military-grade tidal generator and a reverse osmosis desalination plant. A low thrumming vibration began in the floorboards. It was a sound felt more than heard, the deep resonance of turbines spinning up, harvesting the endless energy of the ocean currents. One by one, the emergency lights flickered off and the main systems roared back to life. The air conditioning kicked in with a blast of cool air. The lights shifted from the warm yellow of the grid to a cool, crisp blue hue, the signature of the independent system. I walked to the kitchen and turned on the tap. Crystal clear, purified water flowed instantly. I filled a glass and took a long drink, looking out at the shore. I could see Serafina standing by the excavator, arms crossed, waiting for me to emerge waving a white flag, sweating and thirsty. I went to the wall panel and adjusted the exterior lighting. I turned every floodlight on the property to maximum brightness. The glass atoll lit up like a supernova, beaming a defiant blue glow across the water, blindingly bright even in the daylight. Through the binoculars, I saw Serafina shield her eyes, her mouth dropping open in shock. She pulled out her phone, likely screaming at the power company, unable to understand how I was still operational. She thought she had cut my lifeline. She had only forced me to switch to the backup. But Serafina Galt was not the type of woman to accept defeat after one skirmish. The blockade was just the opening move. Night fell heavy and dark over the bay. The ocean turned into a black void, restless and noisy against the pylons of my home. I sat in the observation lounge. The lights dimmed, watching the bioluminescent algae swirl in the currents below the glass floor. I wasn't relaxing. I was hunting. Something about Serafina's confidence bothered me. An HOA president, even a corrupt one, usually relied on fines and liens. They didn't travel with mercenaries carrying bolt cutters. They didn't own excavators ready to destroy infrastructure at a moment's notice. Her desperation was disproportionate to the offense. She didn't just want me gone because of a car. She wanted this house empty. Why? I opened the large aluminum case I had brought with me. Inside lay my own personal arsenal, not of guns, but of information gathering. I assembled a compact ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, basically a high-tech underwater drone equipped with thermal cameras and sonar. "Let's see what you're hiding, Serafina," I whispered. I lowered the drone into the water through the moon pool in the lower level. On my screen, the underwater world came into sharp relief. I piloted the drone around the pylons of the house, checking the structural integrity. The concrete was solid, encrusted with barnacles, but undamaged. I steered the drone deeper, toward the seabed, 40 feet down. That was when I saw it. Running along the ocean floor, half buried in the sand, was a thick black cable. It wasn't a standard power line. It was too thick, heavily shielded, and it didn't run toward the shore where the utility trench had been dug. It ran perpendicular to the coast, heading toward the deeper channel, and then curved sharply back toward a private cove about half a mile north. I checked the GPS coordinates. The cove belonged to the Galt Resort and Spa, a massive luxury complex owned, unsurprisingly, by Serafina's husband. I maneuvered the drone closer to where the cable met the foundation of my house. There was a junction box attached to the main piling, concealed by a fake rock formation made of fiberglass. It was a splice, a parasitic tap. Holy cow, I muttered. The Galts weren't just trying to kick me out. They were using this house as a massive capacitor. The previous owner had installed a grid tie system capable of handling industrial amounts of power for his illegal operations. The Galts had tapped into it. They were siphoning electricity, massive amounts of it, likely to power their resort or something even more energy-intensive, and sticking the meter on this property. But since the property had been seized and empty for 2 years, no one had been paying the bill, or perhaps they had rigged the meter to bypass the county readings entirely. If I fully occupied the house and brought in inspectors, their parasitic line would be discovered. That was why she needed me gone immediately. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about grand larceny and energy theft on a federal level. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was a felony in progress. Soon, I needed legal air cover. I pulled out my satellite phone, my only link to the world since she had likely jammed the cell towers or cut the landlines. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. Hollis Thorne, a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. It's Vance, I said. There was a pause, then a dry chuckle. Brecken Vance, I thought you were dead. Or farming avocados in Peru. What kind of trouble are you in that requires a maritime lawyer at 10 p.m.? I bought a house. It's in the water. The HOA is trying to sink me, literally. And I think I just found an illegal subsea power tap siphoning megawatts to a local resort. Slow down, Hollis said, the humor vanishing from his voice. Where is the house? Azure Coast, the Glass Atoll. That forfeiture property? That thing is a jurisdictional nightmare. It's built on a reef. Hollis paused, the sound of him shuffling papers audible over the line. Vance, listen to me closely. Is the structure permanently affixed? Or is it technically floating on pontoons with stabilizers? Pontoons, I confirmed. It rises and falls with the tide. It's anchored, not grounded. Then it's not a house, Hollis said, his voice rising with excitement. Legally, under Title 33 of the U.S. Code, if it floats and is capable of movement, it's a vessel. You're not a homeowner, Vance. You're a captain. And that HOA president? If she touches your structure, she's not committing vandalism. She's committing piracy. She cut my access to land, Hollis. She severed the bridge. Did she know? Cutting off access to a registered vessel is a federal offense. Obstructing a navigable waterway. I can have a writ of mandamus on a judge's desk by morning. But Vance, if they are stealing power like you say, they are going to get desperate. They won't wait for a judge. You need to hold the fort. I can hold, I said, looking at the monitor where the drone hovered over the illegal junction box. But I need you to prepare the paperwork. I'm going to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Copy that. I'm waking up my paralegals. Don't sink, Commander. I ended the call. The pieces were falling into place. I had the high ground, legally speaking. Now I just had to survive the night. I left the drone on patrol mode, circling the perimeter of the house, and went to the kitchen to brew coffee. The silence of the ocean was deceptive. It felt heavy, pressing against the glass. Around 2 a.m., the drone's proximity alarm chimed softly. I moved to the monitors. On the thermal imaging screen, 3 heat signatures were approaching the house from the north side. They were underwater, moving swiftly. Divers. They weren't using lights. These were professionals, using rebreathers to avoid bubbles. Serafina wasn't waiting for morning. She was sending a sabotage team. I zoomed in. They were carrying heavy equipment bags, hydraulic cutters. They were going for the main anchor cables. If they severed those, the tidal current would drag the entire house out into the open ocean, where the structure would twist and shatter. They intended to wreck the house and make it look like a structural failure due to lack of maintenance. I could have called the Coast Guard then. I could have grabbed a spear gun and jumped in the water. But that would be messy. That would be violence. And in my experience, humiliation was a far more effective deterrent than pain. I sat down at the console and pulled up the interface for the house's external communication system. The previous owner had installed a high-output underwater public address system, likely to call his divers back or perhaps just to listen to music while swimming. But the speakers were industrial grade, capable of producing decibels that vibrated bone. I watched the divers on the screen. They had reached the north pylon. One of them was attaching a clamp to the steel cable. "Let's test your hearing," I muttered. I selected a frequency file from the system's library. It wasn't music. It was a sonar pulse sequence designed to repel aggressive marine life, specifically sharks. It was a jagged, oscillating screech that hit the nervous system like a hammer. I set the volume to 80% and hit play. On the screen, the effect was instantaneous. The water around the pylon seemed to vibrate. The three divers convulsed as if they had been electrocuted. The sound wasn't just loud. Underwater, sound travels 4 times faster than in air and hits the body with physical force. It disoriented the inner ear immediately. They dropped their tools. One of them spun in circles, completely losing his sense of up and down. Another clawed at his ears, thrashing wildly. They abandoned the mission in a heartbeat, kicking frantically toward the surface, desperate to escape the sonic assault. I switched the camera to the surface view. 3 heads bobbed up in the moonlight, gasping for air, ripping off their masks. They were vomiting, dizzy, and terrified. A support boat that had been drifting silently nearby roared its engine to life and sped over to retrieve them. "Holy cow," I said, watching them being hauled into the boat like wet sacks of flour. "Look at them swimming. They broke the Olympic record." I saved the video file. Attempted sabotage of a federal vessel. Another felony for the pile. If you're still here at this point, you know the storm is coming. Drop an anchor emoji below if you stand with the commander. The next morning, the sun rose over a calm, innocent-looking sea. The trench on the shore was still there, a jagged scar in the road. But the house remained anchored, powered, and defiant. I knew Serafina would be panicking. Her night raid had failed. Her power theft was still active but vulnerable. She needed a new plan, and she needed it fast. Around 10 a.m., a drone, not mine, buzzed overhead. It carried a small payload, dropping a plastic canister onto my deck. I walked out and picked it up. Inside was a note, handwritten on elegant stationery. "Mr. Vance, we seem to have started off on the wrong foot. The HOA board would like to discuss a settlement. We are willing to purchase the property from you for double what you paid. Cash. Today. Please come to the shore to discuss terms. We have repaired a section of the bridge for your exit. Double the price." That was a lot of money. It was also a confession. Innocent people don't offer double market value to make a neighbor go away. They were terrified I would find the cable. They didn't know I already had. I looked through the binoculars. They had indeed laid a temporary metal ramp over the trench. A black limousine was parked on the shore, waiting. Serafina stood next to it, pacing. This was the trap. If I left the vessel, they would swarm it. They would rip out the illegal cabling, destroy the evidence, and then claim I had abandoned the property. Or worse, the settlement meeting would involve the corrupt local sheriff arresting me for some trumped-up charge while her crew gutted my house. I needed them to come to me. I needed them inside the house, on the record, implicating themselves when the hammer dropped. I walked to the radio and hailed the Coast Guard channel, then patched in Hollis. "Hollis, are we ready?" "The writ is signed, Vance. Federal Marshals and Coast Guard Sector Command are briefed. They are treating this as critical infrastructure tampering. They are en route. ETA 45 minutes. "Perfect," I said. "I'm going to invite them in." I grabbed a megaphone and walked out to the edge of the gap where the bridge used to be. I saw Serafina looking at me, hopeful. "Mrs. Galt," I shouted, "I accept your offer, but I'm not leaving the property until the money is wired. Come inside. Bring the board. Let's sign the papers in the air conditioning." I saw her hesitate, then confer with a man in a suit next to her, likely her lawyer or the resort manager. They nodded. They thought they had won. They thought money had broken me. "Extend the bridge," she shouted back. I pressed the remote. The steel walkway slid back out, reconnecting the garage to the house. I manually lowered the security bollards on the shore side. Serafina, the man in the suit, and 3 other board members, all dressed in expensive resort wear, began to walk across the temporary ramp, then onto the causeway, and finally onto my deck. They looked triumphant. They walked with the swagger of people who believed that everything in the world had a price, and they had just bought their way out of prison. I met them at the main glass doors. I had changed into a clean shirt, looking every bit the defeated homeowner ready to cash out. "Wise decision, Mr. Vance," Serafina said, stepping into the cool air of the living room. She looked around, her eyes darting instantly to the floor, checking for any signs that I had accessed the sub-sea levels. This place is too much for one man anyway. "It's a lot of maintenance," I agreed, leading them toward the center of the room, directly over the glass floor section that looked down into the abyss. "The power systems alone are complex." The man in the suit stiffened. "We'll handle the systems. We have our own engineers." "I bet you do," I said. I gestured for them to sit on the white leather sofas. "Can I get you anything? Water? It's fresh from the desalination plant." "Just the papers," Serafina said, snapping her fingers. Her lawyer placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. "Sign here, here, and here. The transfer will be initiated immediately, and you will vacate the premises within the hour." I picked up the pen. I looked at the contract. It was a complete surrender of rights, including a non-disclosure agreement that covered any and all structural anomalies found on the property. "This is very thorough," I said, stalling. I glanced at my watch. 3 minutes out. "We like to be precise," Serafina smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. "The HOA values order above all else." "You know," I said, setting the pen down, "I found something interesting while I was doing maintenance yesterday." The room went deadly silent. The air conditioning seemed to hum louder. "Oh?" Serafina asked, her voice tight. "Yeah. A big black cable, running right into my foundation. Seems to be carrying enough voltage to power a small city or a resort." The lawyer stood up. Mr. Vance, sign the paper or the deal is off. I don't think I will, I said, standing up. Serafina dropped the pretense. You listen to me, you little grunt. You are alone here. We have the police, the judges, and the town council. You sign that paper, or you will disappear, and this house will be demolished by morning. I'm not alone, I said calmly. I pulled the remote from my pocket and pressed a different button. Thud. Magnetic locks slammed shut on every door in the room. Heavy security shutters descended over the land-facing windows. The group jumped up, panicked. What are you doing? Serafina screamed. Let us out! I'm not locking you in with me, I said, walking toward the wall panel. I'm locking you in with the evidence. I tapped the screen. The massive smart glass floor beneath our feet, which had been opaque, suddenly turned transparent. Below us, illuminated by the drone's spotlights, was the illegal junction box, clearly visible, pulsing with the stolen energy. And next to it, my drone was projecting a live feed of the data it was collecting. Energy usage stats, IP addresses leading back to the Galt Resort, and the date of installation. That, I pointed down, is a federal crime, tampering with the power grid, theft of services, and since you just admitted to controlling this infrastructure, that's a confession. Serafina lunged for me, her nails aiming for my face. Open the door! Sheriff Boyd is on his way. I know, I said, sidestepping her easily, but he's going to be a little late. I pointed out to the sea. Through the panoramic ocean-facing windows, the horizon was no longer empty. Two high-speed interceptor boats, painted in the distinct orange and white of the United States Coast Guard, were tearing across the water, kicking up massive rooster tails of spray. Above them, a black MH-65 Dolphin helicopter banked sharply, the sound of its rotors beginning to vibrate the glass walls of the house. Serafina stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror as she realized the storm had finally arrived. And this time, she had nowhere to run. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. The sound was not merely a noise, it was a physical weight, a barometric crush that pressed against the tempered glass walls of the atrium until the crystal stemware on the wet bar began to sing in sympathetic resonance. The MH-65 Dolphin helicopter hovered at a tactical altitude of 100 feet, its rotors churning the Pacific air into a violent downwash that flattened the ocean surface into a chaotic canvas of white foam and stinging spray. Inside the living room of the glass atoll, the atmosphere of arrogant entitlement that had permeated the space just moments ago evaporated instantly, replaced by the primal, freezing temperature of absolute fear. Serafina Galt, the woman who had marched into my sanctuary with the certainty of a monarch, dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the smart glass floor, the Chardonnay pooling and mixing with the view of the illuminated abyss below, a perfect visual metaphor for her dissolving empire. She stumbled back, her heels catching on the edge of the rug, her hands flying to her ears to block out the deafening mechanical roar. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stripped of his bravado and his billable hours, was frantically tapping on his phone, his face pale as he realized that no signal could penetrate the electronic jamming bubble the Coast Guard had deployed. I stood by the titanium control panel, watching the chaos with the cold, calculated detachment of a man who had not only expected the storm, but had personally sent the invitation. I did not feel triumph yet. Triumph is an emotion for the after-action report. Right now, this is execution. This was geometry and timing. "You lunatic!" Serafina shrieked during a momentary lull as the helicopter flared out to hold a precise hover position. She lunged toward me, her face a mask of panicked rage, her perfect hair whipping around her face in the drafts leaking through the vents. "You called the military? Over a property dispute? You will be buried under so many lawsuits your grandchildren will be paying legal fees. I will have your pension. I will have this house crushed into gravel." "It is not the military, Mrs. Galt," I said, my voice projected clearly through the house's internal PA system, cutting through the din without me having to raise a shout. "It is federal law enforcement, and this is no longer a property dispute. It is an active crime scene." I pointed to the floor. The smart glass was still transparent, and the drone's high-lumen spotlight below was unforgiving. It illuminated the thick, illegal conduit snaking from my foundation toward her husband's resort, like a black artery pulsing with stolen lifeblood. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her eyes following my finger to the damning evidence below. "Turn the floor off! You are fabricating this!" She rushed toward the wall panel, her manicured nails aimed at the interface. I caught her wrist. I did not squeeze, did not twist, just held it with the immovable firmness of a hydraulic clamp. She gasped, looking at my hand, then up at my eyes. She saw no anger there, only a calm that terrified her more than any threat. "Do not touch the evidence," I said softly. I released her, and she stumbled back, colliding with her lawyer. "Sheriff Boyd!" she yelled suddenly, looking toward the shore where blue and red lights were fracturing the evening gloom. "Call Boyd. He will fix this. He has jurisdiction here. He is the law." As if summoned by her desperation, the lights flashed brighter on the mainland side of the severed causeway. Two county sheriff cruisers skidded to a halt near the trench the HOA had dug earlier, dust billowing around their tires. Doors flew open, and Sheriff Boyd Calloway emerged. He was a man who wore his uniform like a costume of authority. Tight shirt, mirrored sunglasses, even at dusk, and a hand resting casually on his holster. He looked at the hovering helicopter, then at the house, his face twisting in a knot of confusion and territorial anger. He grabbed a bullhorn from his trunk and marched across the temporary metal ramp the HOA had installed, ignoring the chaotic winds from the chopper that threatened to blow his hat into the sea. He marched right up to the heavy security bollards I had raised at the end of the walkway, the only thing separating his jurisdiction from mine. "Vance!" Boyd's voice boomed, distorted by the bullhorn, echoing off the glass walls. "Open this gate immediately. You are creating a public disturbance and endangering civilians. I have a warrant for your arrest for kidnapping and domestic terrorism." Serafina's face lit up with a desperate, pathetic hope. She rushed to the glass wall facing the shore, banging on it with her fists. "Boyd, he trapped us. He is holding us hostage. Shoot the lock. Arrest him." I looked at the external monitor feed. Sheriff Boyd was unholstering his taser, preparing to fire it over the gate if I came within range. He was used to being the final word in Azure Coast. He was used to judges doing favors over golf and evidence disappearing from lockers. He was not ready for the hierarchy of power to shift. He did not understand that he was a minnow swimming into a reactor turbine. "Open the gate, Vance!" Boyd shouted again, his hand moving from the taser to his service weapon. "Or we will breach!" I walked to the intercom console, pressing the button that broadcast to the external speakers. "Sheriff, I advise you to stand down. This is an active federal zone." "I do not care if it is the White House lawn," Boyd yelled, his face turning a mottled purple. I am the sheriff of this county, and I am ordering you to surrender." He signaled to his deputy, who was pulling a heavy battering ram from the cruiser. They were actually going to try to storm a floating fortress protected by the United States government. "If you are still here, hold tight, because the storm has fully arrived. If you stand with the commander against this corruption, drop an anchor emoji in the comments right now." Just as the deputy raised the ram, the radio in my pocket crackled. "Commander Vance, this is Captain Ryland, USCG Sector Command. We are deploying a boarding team. Is the deck secure?" "The deck is secure, Captain," I replied, watching Boyd through the glass. "But I have local law enforcement attempting to breach the perimeter on the land side. They seem confused about jurisdiction." "Copy that." Ryland's voice was dry, the voice of a man who had seen everything on the high seas. "We will clarify it for them." From the hovering helicopter, a winch cable dropped. Fast roping down with practiced precision came 4 Coast Guard maritime safety and security team operators. They were geared for high-risk boardings, ballistic helmets, tactical vests, sidearms, and carbines slung across their chests. They hit the roof deck of my house with heavy thuds, their boots gripping the wet surface, moving with a fluidity that made Boyd's deputies look like amateurs. Simultaneously, one of the high-speed interceptor boats pulled alongside the floating platform where my Ferrari sat. A second team boarded from the sea, securing the perimeter. The team from the helicopter moved instantly. 2 operators secured the main doors, while the team leader, a lieutenant with eyes like flint, walked straight to the glass wall where Sheriff Boyd was posturing. The lieutenant opened the side door and stepped out onto the walkway, placing himself directly between me and the sheriff. "Step away from the gate," the lieutenant ordered, his voice flat and authoritative, cutting through the wind. Sheriff Boyd blinked, lowering his bullhorn. "Now listen here, son. I am Sheriff Calloway. I am responding to a hostage situation. That man inside is a dangerous individual. I need you to step aside." "That man is the owner of this vessel," the lieutenant corrected, his hand resting near his chest rig. "And this structure is currently under the control of the United States Coast Guard, pending an investigation into maritime infrastructure sabotage. Your jurisdiction ends at the high tide line, Sheriff. Step back." "Sabotage?" Boyd sputtered, saliva flying. "What are you talking about? This is a civil dispute. The HOA president is in there. She is a pillar of this community." "We know who she is," the lieutenant said. "She is a person of interest in a federal inquiry regarding the theft of energy and tampering with navigational hazards. If you interfere, Sheriff, I will have you detained for obstruction of justice. Do I make myself clear?" Boyd looked at the heavily armed operators behind the lieutenant. He looked at the helicopter still circling overhead like a bird of prey. He looked at Serafina, who was pressing her hands against the glass, pleading with her eyes, mouthing the word, "help." Then he looked at his own pension. The calculation was visible in his eyes. Slowly, painfully, Boyd holstered his taser. He took a step back. I will be coordinating from the shore," he muttered, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity. "Just ensuring public safety." "You do that," the lieutenant said. He turned to me and nodded. "Mr. Vance, permission to come aboard?" "Permission granted," I said. I unlocked the main magnetic seals. The glass doors slid open with a hiss. The wind and noise of the outside world rushed in, but it felt like fresh air.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.